Let's further discuss this now with Alexey Muraviev. He's an associate professor of national security studies at Curtin University. Thank you, Professor, for being with us on the program. I mean, there aren't many expectations on progress for peace from this meeting, given that it's not happening with a ceasefire in place, given that Zelensky isn't taking place. What are your thoughts moving forward?
Look, I mean, this meeting is not just going to be about Ukraine. Yes, Ukraine will feature prominently in the conversation, as it's been stated by both the Americans as well as the Russians, but they've got a lot of other issues to discuss. And perhaps one of the reasons why there has been a gradual change of tone from what to expect of this meeting is because clearly the presidents did not just decide instantaneously that they're going to meet with each other. I think that's been planned for quite some time. There's been work done behind the scenes, and the work continued throughout the past 7 days, also indicating what each side, particularly the Russians, are willing to negotiate or bargain with and what they're not prepared to bargain on. And I think Trump's rhetoric that began kind of downgrading the anticipated outcome of the meeting is a reflection that clearly we're not going to see any major breakthroughs on the Ukraine front. Perhaps an agreement will be reached, but may not necessarily be made public yet. But on the other hand, Trump doesn't want to make Ukraine a roadblocker in his conversations, strategic conversations with a major nuclear superpower. And that's why he continues to put on a positive spin. Yes, everyone can do an eye check, within 2 minutes. And I don't think it's only Trump that can do that. I think Putin will also be checking on Trump. But that's not the end game. The end game is for them to come out and say something positive.
Right.
And clearly this is something that's been already worked out. Otherwise, there won't be point for them to meet in the first instance.
Yeah, I mean, they'll surely speak about conditions and terms for an end to the war. How likely is the land for ceasefire scenario?
Well, it would very much depend on how hard Putin will run with his terms and conditions, because we need to have a reality check. I think the whole conversation of why Zelensky is not part of it, or why the meeting is taking place between the United States and Russia, it's because it's a meeting of two heavyweights. It's a meeting of two major powers that got other issues to discuss besides Ukraine, but obviously Ukraine will also be a very important point to them, also because it has become a proxy conflict between Russia and the United States. So they are the ones that will make calls in this sense. On the other hand, Russia has a strategic advantage on the battlefield. And that's another reason why Zelensky is not present in the room, because he doesn't have, to quote Donald Trump, doesn't have the cards. His attempt to create a bargaining situation when he ordered his troops to move into the Kursk region has now been taken away from him. The Russians continue to advance, and Trump understands it. And Trump keeps making this point about who can win this war and who will lose this war. And that's why he is talking to a potential winner of the conflict without having Zelensky in the first groundbreaking meeting, and whatever will follow on from that would almost be a presentation of the outcomes that Putin and Trump will reach, and an attempt to settle it on terms that would be suitable to Moscow and more or less acceptable to the Ukrainians.
This is also one of the reasons why security guarantees are of great importance for Zelensky. He's mentioned it in almost every single one of his speeches that he's had in recent time, particularly with his EU allies. And Russia has opposed many of the possible security guarantees already put forward. Can we expect some change on that front?
Well, I don't think the Russians will accept any possibility of Ukraine joining NATO or NATO having a presence in Ukraine. Whether they will insist on it, whether they will attempt to enforce it in any form of an agreement, that's difficult to say. I don't think the Russians will have a massive fuss about Ukraine sidelining with the European Union, eventually joining it. I think they kind of accepted that that would probably be one of the eventual outcomes sometime down the track. But other than that, it would come to it would come to a matter of trust. Because even if an agreement will be signed between, say, President Zelensky and President Putin, what is the guarantee, A, that it will be implemented, that it would be recognized by both parties, not just by the governments, but by the people of both countries, and whether it will be honored long term. I think the bigger question is whatever the agreement will be made that may lead to a ceasefire, whether this ceasefire will stay as a prolonged condition rather than a temporary condition which would see an eventual reincarnation or resumption of violence. And I think that is the stumbling block right now, not just what both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, would be willing to negotiate and bargain, but more importantly, whether they would honor the obligations and make them actually realistic and implement them long term. And I think that's where the hidden underwater stones actually lie.
Okay, Professor Alexey Muraviev, thank you so much for being with us here on the NewsHour and sharing that insight with us.